I just want when people tune in to watch to feel like we're sitting in a coffee shop and you and I are chatting and they get to eavesdrop on our conversation. Hey everyone! It is Thursday, the last Thursday of the month. I've got my interviewing shirt on and I got my raspberry lime spindrift. So you know what that means? It means it's time for PCPA's Talkback series. I'm Eric Stein. I am so happy that you all are here. Listen, we've been doing this series now for a year. A year we've been going. And I can't think of a better person to start our brand new Talkback series with than Elisabeth Weidner. Elisabeth and I started at PCPA together. We like to say we're in the same PCPA class, even though we started together like it was our job. But I want to say it was like 12 years ago, the fall of 2009. Mm-hmm. Elisabeth and I were both hired. I was brought in to be the casting director, and Elisabeth, you were brought in to be the resident sound engineer. Is that right?
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know what a sound engineer is, this is the person, when you come to see a show, this is the person in the back of the theater standing at the really cool fancy soundboard with all of the different sliders and levers and buttons, making sure that the show sounds good. And Elisabeth was so good at that. She made our shows sound so good that she very quickly went from being the sound engineer to being our resident sound designer. What is the job of a theatrical sound designer?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a sound designer composer. The two don't necessarily always go hand in hand. It really spices up my life that the two do go hand in hand for me. And I started out in music. I began my life in music and sort of veered towards theater later. So my entire approach to working in this field is from a musical standpoint. The sound designer for theater is the person who makes decisions about which speakers we're going to use, which microphones we're going to use, placement of those things, even if we need to disguise them, if we need to paint a microphone, build it into a costume piece, hide a speaker into the scenery. Those are all decisions that the sound designer makes. And then additionally, the sound designer is the person that makes all the sound. So they are writing all of the sound effects or gathering them, usually a combination of those things. Implementing the playback of all of the sound through, the industry standard playback system is QLab, but there's many ways that it can be done.
You're designing the sound for a show that starts in an indoor theater of about 450 seats. And then that show's going to get picked up and it's going to be moved to an outdoor theater with no roof and about 700 and something seats.
Mm-hmm. That's an hour away from us that we can't just like hop into and fix something.
Yeah, that's right. It's an hour away, so you can't just pop over to get something that you left behind.
The first show that I got to do in Solvang was the 39 Steps. And that, as you know, is a huge, huge show. There are hundreds of sound cues in it. It's a really sound heavy show. In fact, it's the first show that a sound designer was ever recognized for and received a Tony for.
Wow. I didn't know that. It's been a major show in your career too, because you've designed it several times now, and that's huge because it's a massive show.
11 times.
Wow.
I've designed it 11 times. I've designed it more than any other show, and I remember that someone from the Ensemble Theater in Santa Barbara had seen our performance of it and reached out to me and asked me if I would design theirs.
As designers, do you own your design, or does the theater company own the design?
The theater, it's both kind of, really, I really think it's both, and it's a thing that people are still talking about and trying to figure out all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it would be good business for a theater to put on a show that they had done 10 years ago and happen to have the entire QLab session of still and just put it, load that QLab session of a designer that wasn't there anymore without their permission or something. I would think that the theater would contact that designer and say, we'd like to use this, maybe are you available for a remount? And if not, will you let us rent your intellectual property, portion of this show. So in the case of me and traveling with a show that I had already designed, when I spoke to Mark about it, he said, like, absolutely do that. And in fact, we would love for you to do that. That's good for everybody. And no matter what you do, though, it is going to change. Every director is going to have their own twist and their own things. And every time that I've done the show, it's been different. I kind of always start with a base cue sheet that I give to the director. And then they say, I love it, except for these, this 10% of things. Can we do this instead? And, that's sort of how the ball gets rolling into a new form. And so it's really, I'm never worried about it now. That first time I was really worried because I didn't want anyone to think that I was just gonna, just peddle the same show around like Spirit Fingers guy and bring it on.
That's right. Well, I mean, what's great is just your willingness to communicate. Sometimes that seems to be the obstacle. That seems to be the thing that gets in the way of harmony. You don't ever worry that Elisabeth's not going to let you know what's working and what's not working.
But I haven't always been that way. I really did have to learn it the hard way. I did not perceive myself in any kind of a way until somebody else had a perception of me that I didn't know I needed to be on the lookout for. And so when I was in college, and I went to school at Florida State University for music. I was a music major. I think my sophomore year of college, I started working in the recital halls in the School of Music. And I would set up the stage and, however a performer would need it. I would record the recitals, edit them, give the performer a CD of their performance, and, various other things. On the recitals was always just one lead technician, a student, and then 2 to 3 other technicians, still students. And I sort of quickly got into I'm always the lead technician role. And we were doing a show for a really high profile musician who you would know the name of if I said it right now. And it was for this special event that happens every year at Florida State. And I always had this spiel. I was 19 years old. I always had this spiel where I would come up to the performer and say, like, hi, I'm Elisabeth. I'm going to be running your show today. I'm going to be recording for you. I'll be in the booth. Here's, how I expect it to go. Do you have any expectations of me? What can I tell my technician on the stage to make your, performance as smooth as possible? When do you want doors paged? Just checking in about how the thing was going to go. So I walked up to this person to have my spiel, and he was lovely. And he, shook my hand and was like, oh, nice to meet you. He is very down to earth. And then out of nowhere, his manager just came speeding over from upstage, sort of burst in between us and was like, hi, I'm so-and-so. Who are you? And I said, well, same thing. I'm Elisabeth. I'm going to be recording the show today. Just wanted to check in and do. And he's sort of just like nodding a little bit. I was like, okay. Well, when your boss gets here, I could talk about that with him. Oh, wow. And I was like, huh. I hadn't encountered this thing, which I now have a lot, but that was the first time. And I was a kid, basically. I was 19 years old, and I was like, oh, it's me. I'm the boss. Wow. I'm the lead technician today, so that's why I want to make sure and he just looked at me and he was like, who else is going to be here though? I'm like, well, this other student technician and that other student technician. At one point, one of my male coworkers came to stand next to me he was working on stage. He just came over and stood next to me. He was younger than me and had been working there last time. And this guy, but he was tall. He was big and tall. You know, he was already, you know, he was like 6'2" or something. And this manager of this artist shook this guy's hand and said, "You must be the boss." And he said, "No, sir. I'm just here to see what boss lady here needs from me." And that guy did not want to give me any information. He was incredibly rude to me, could not fathom that I was in charge of the day, you know, and that was when I really sat back and went, what was that? Do I sound unprofessional when I'm talking? Was I weird? Like, did something happen? And I had to ask a bunch of people about it. And finally I asked my mentor, who I've been taking who I took recording classes and lessons and stuff from. And he said, that happened because you're a woman. And I was like, what? What does that mean? Why? And he said, because there are so few women in this industry, you know, less than 5%, that other men think that they don't know what they're doing. Just, that's it.
I'm sure many people who are watching right now could tell us stories about how it's happening even in 2021.
It's at least, at the very least, acknowledged, and, you know, people know that it exists, and there's a lot of advocacy and discussion out there about it right now. So that's really good, and hopefully it won't be a fad, and it will just continue to you know, help bolster the opinion or the fact, really, that that women can do this job too. Any job, anything.
Yeah. Well, the more women we have in the room in leadership roles, the more it will normalize and it will just become the norm. I just have to take a second to just give a huge shout out to Suzanne and Ron Levy. They're incredible. They have been unbelievable supporters of PCPA for years and years. Long before Elisabeth and I got here, they were already here supporting. So we're so grateful to them. How did music come into your life?
Music came into my life probably through my dad. My mom is so wonderful, my biggest cheerleader, my rock, my best friend. I speak to her every single day. But, you know, my dad is the one that has all the talent. And so I sort of just grew up listening to music, going to musicals. I mean, you know, my parents love to tell everyone at parties about 3-year-old me standing on a coffee table singing every single word of Annie, you know, being all the parts, like knowing all the blocking, singing all the songs. But I just didn't get as involved in theater as much as I loved it. Loved it. But I loved the music side of it so much more. I was in a sort of a piano studio where I took an individual lesson once a week, and then I had a group lesson with this like piano studio also. So 2 times a week I was doing music training. Meanwhile, my dad was teaching me how to play Piano Man on the piano. So that's the first song I learned how to play. I had it memorized.
That's the best. Where do you go from that?
I know. I got to 1 month into, or just a couple of days into my piano lessons. They would have a monthly piano recital just in this woman's home, and she said, "Well, you should come to the piano recital, but you know, you obviously don't know how to play the piano yet, so you'll just watch." And I said, "Oh, I know how to play something. I can play in the recital." And she was like, "Oh, okay, great." And everybody else played there, you know, like little like baby Chopin or whatever, like 6-year-old, you know, watered down classical music things that they were learning. And then I played Piano Man. And really, I think my piano teacher was aghast. She was like 150 years old. And she was just like, "No, that is not what I meant by you can perform." It was too late. I played the whole thing.
Have you started your daughters in or have they expressed any interest in any instruments?
When my oldest daughter Moira, she expressed interest in piano when she was younger, and then when she started school, or got to the grade where she could be in band, she started playing the saxophone.
Oh.
So she's been playing saxophone for about 3 years now. And then Matilda, my youngest, who is 7, is extremely musical. She is also a 3-year-old standing on a coffee table, knowing all the words to every musical in the world.
Yes.
She can sing everything. I almost want to say has perfect pitch. If not, she definitely has relative pitch.
How did composition come into your life? Do you remember the first thing that you was yours that you composed?
Absolutely. I absolutely remember. So I switched piano lessons from Hazel, the 150-year-old piano teacher. And then I went to this other piano teacher, still in Colorado, who was a composer. And so she really, all of my lessons, and usually piano lessons in general, involve a theory component. You always have a theory book that you write in. But this teacher specifically was a composer, and so she really wanted to do that with me. And she had a green calligraphy pen that she would get out a clean piece of staff paper. She would say, "Let's write a song today. What do you want it to be called?" And the first one I wrote was called Butterflies.
Wow.
And she wrote on there with her green calligraphy pen, and it was just like she could just calligraphy like it was, the 1400s. And she just would write butterflies with all these like little squiggles and filigree and stuff. And then I would just play something and she would write it down, and then I'd play and she'd write it down, and we would do that like once a week.
That's so cool. Yeah. That is so cool. When somebody says, "All right, Elisabeth, we're doing The Whipping Man, and we would like you to compose music for The Whipping Man," how is that different, composing music for The Whipping Man versus writing songs for a musical? Because you do both.
So what I do is talk to the director. We kind of come up with reference material first. So we sort of talked about Civil War music and slave songs. We listened to a lot of things that we really like, and then I kind of speak about a moment like, do you think that this moment here is going to be our piccolo and snare drum marching on the battlefield moment? Because that can give me a sort of an aural idea of what we're thinking of, as opposed to a pull on the heartstrings, sad, boost emotional value on stage kind of a moment, or tense, we're about to chop this guy's leg off. This is really scary. Also, he's actually physically close to the audience members. There was
also, if I remember too from listening to, there was also a beautiful Jewish element that ran through that show as well. So you had a kind of a cultural Jewish sound that was woven into the Civil War, and the fact that we were also representing folks who had been slaves, not that, but like honestly, like a month ago they had just been emancipated. So there was so much to that.
And the Jewish aspect of it was like one of my favorites to really glom onto, because there are specific there's our specific scales and keys and modes and things like that are used in certainly in the very traditional parts of their music. And so I was like, oh, okay, great. If I just write in this key or in this mode, it'll just sound the way it's supposed to sound. I'm sure I'm asking a hard question, but do you have a favorite composition that you've done for a show? It is hard, because I just love like the Penelope ad. I loved so much. I thought the show was just so beautiful. I loved doing The Tempest. But I have to say my favorite was Three Sisters. Even though it wasn't necessarily my favorite show to design, it's not like necessarily my favorite kind of theater. It was my favorite thing to compose because I got to hire a live orchestra, or rather a quartet, and I got to hand my music that was bound, and a conductor's score over to the conductor, and then I just watched him have these musicians make my music, and then they would have a question about a thing, and then he's like, oh, well, let's ask the composer. Elisabeth, do. I'm like, oh, well, I think that we should do this and that, and it just felt so special to have, because most of the time I have to or get to do it all myself. I just do it on either the real instruments that I play or the MIDI versions, on keyboard. But having somebody else do it was just sort of another level.
Isn't that so cool when you actually, because when you can actually hold something you created, because what we do, we genuinely don't get to hold it. Like
Right.
your artistry as a sound designer is something that is put out there, but you can't actually take it home and go, hey, look what I made.
Right, exactly. So much so that it's even hard to have like a reel or anything like that. I have a website and I have samples on there, but I don't even have any sound design samples on there because I'm almost like, I don't want you to hear it if you haven't seen the show.
Yeah, it may not make sense out of context.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like here you go. Here's some car horns. I hope you enjoy them.
This is my selection of car horns. Please hire me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Elisabeth, so we talked about creating music as a composer for the atmosphere of a play. Now I want to hear what it's like to create music that's job is to further the action of a play, when you're actually writing music for a musical. So you have several now. I'm going to focus on two right now. You wrote the music for the musical Reach, and the music for just an adorable show that I just think every school should be doing, My Little Zombie. So how did you approach writing the music for Reach, and how did that then affect how you approached writing the music for My Little Zombie?
Well, on both of those, I had an excellent writing partner, Wendy Marie Martin, and that is a big piece of the puzzle. So Wendy wrote both of those shows, and let's see. Wendy wrote so we started with Reach first. We did Reach first. She had already written out she'd already written the script and she'd already written the lyrics. And then I was brought in actually to replace somebody else that ended up not being able to be a part of the production. And so it was kind of a crunch time situation. Like, can you just really quickly compose this full scale musical? There's only 22 numbers. And so I started with the lyrics because they were already written. Again, sort of like in the way that I was talking about speaking with a director, Wendy and I talked a lot about the feeling of each of the songs and sort of what style they should be. That one was all about a high school girl who's sort of trying to find herself. And so she goes through a lot of phases. And so there really were a bunch of different styles. To support when she thinks she might join the anime club or be a cheerleader or join the salsa club or, all of these things, robotics. So we had music that kind of went along with all of these themes. And that show was already in rehearsal. So we also already had a cast. And that was really was the base for me because I already had my singers there. That's a really hard thing to write for nobody, to know like what's gonna work and how it's gonna sound. I feel like probably a lot of composers sing their own songs, and are tending to sort of start from what they're comfortable with the most. But I already had who was going to be singing my songs, and so I just I would sort of make a little scratch track and just write half a page, ask someone to sing it, get feedback from them on where it felt to them as far as their placement. Wendy and I would listen to them say like, oh, well, actually, maybe we don't need that chorus 3 times or this or that. And, it was just a big collaboration between me, Wendy, and the actors. And then it was a little different for My Little Zombie. It was still the Wendy and Elisabeth show, but we were specifically writing a show for her daughter's school. Her daughter's middle school wanted to put on a show. They wanted it to be original, and around Halloween time. And so then, since we were both in it from the beginning, we both maybe we were sort of doing the same process as far as starting from lyrics, testing things, but we were able to do all of that together from the beginning. So we both had a say in what the lyrics were going to be. Again, I think I can answer any question you're about to ask me with collaboration. It's just about collaboration.
What is next? Obviously we're putting the pandemic behind us, and we are going to achieve some new normalcy very soon. Mm-hmm. What is tangibly next for you, and what are you hopeful is next for you?
Well, I've gotten one call about an upcoming show. Well, not upcoming. It will be the next winter show at Cal Poly that our good friend Karen Hendricks Bolin is directing. But my big pie in the sky dream is to get to New York. I don't want to live in New York, really. I don't want to be there forever, but I do want to do some shows there. And it's really hard to be a West Coast designer and be, recognized and called by New York. It's hard to be in New York and called by New York.
Listen, Elisabeth, thank you. Gosh, what a great way to kick off the brand new Talkback series. I just love spending time with you. I couldn't be more grateful that you are our resident guest artist at PCPA.
I'm honored to be so. Thank you.
Folks, thanks so much for tuning in, and we can't wait until we can all be in the same room together again. See ya.